The NBA season is well underway. Thanksgiving is in the books. And as I hope all of you have enjoyed your various family holiday traditions, it's time to resuscitate a tradition on chucking darts. That is by ranking the prospects from each of the last three draft classes in a redraft format. Is the return of Dart Rank. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This is episode number 236. Last episode 235 was with Nate Grubel at Draft Deeper of No Ceilings. He was on to talk about the NBA rookies from the most recent draft class and his sort of ranking of them thus far. So we covered Con Knipple, Cedric Coward, Cooper Flagg, VJ Edgecombe, Dylan Harper, as well as, some guys from the second round who'd been playing really well, Ryan Kalkbrenner, Will Richard, etc. Derek Queen, Jeremiah Fears on the Pelicans. That was a very good episode, very fun. Good insight into how the rookies have performed thus far and the context in which they are so doing. So I encourage you to check that out. This is a bit more sprawling of an episode and of a project. My guest is Sam Ferris, who is at Draft Dummies on Twitter, a credentialed NBA draft analyst, someone who has been a veteran in the space for a very long time, like myself. And for a while, I think for 2 or 3 consecutive summers, we would do an episode on my show, usually in 2 parts, that was about ranking the players from each of the last 3 draft classes. So for today's version, that will be the 2023 draft, headlined by Victor Wembanyama, the 2024 draft, headlined, I suppose, by Zaccharie Risacher, and the 2025 draft, headlined by Cooper Flagg. Everyone is eligible. We are going to go probably out to 20 or maybe 21 so that we get an even number divided by 3. But that's the episode, and I'm very excited for it to be back after a hiatus. So, Sam, welcome back, and how are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate the invite back on the show. I think, like you said, I believe this is the third year we've done it. So, um, as always, very excited to see your list. It was an interesting kind of thought process as I jotted this down to go through first ranking by draft class and then from there kind of mixing it together. And it's that fun kind of thought process of the class from 2023, we've kind of gotten a decent amount of information at this point versus the new rookies this year. And that's kind of the fun to me of doing this exercise.
It's very fun. Thank you. Yeah. And, when we've done this in the past, it's been over the summer during the off season when the rookies have yet to debut. So we can be, I guess a bit more aggressive with our rankings or whatever. There's going to be some recency bias built in here. But I had noticed because I wanted to make sure I got the number right for what number this episode was that by coincidence, the last like 4 or 5 episodes of my show have all been like rankings in some respect, ranking offenses, ranking defenses, ranking rookies. So as I have become, the podcast hack that I've so desperately tried to avoid becoming over the course of my show here, I say screw it and let's just embrace it. But I will defend this, number one, because we've been doing it for a while, this specific exercise. So it's not like we're jumping on, we're not piggybacking on anything, I don't think, combining 3 classes into one like this. And for me, as a draft analyst, I suppose I can call myself as well, it is useful. It really is. Because when I go through and I try to scout whatever current crop that is. I haven't really spoken about the 2026 class yet. You know, that's a months long process. And despite what anyone may tell you, like the cycle through which you analyze these guys, you're going to start overthinking things. Now, sometimes that can be helpful because maybe you uncover stuff that you haven't seen, but other times, and I think most frequently, you kind of get hyper focused on certain prospects, certain theories, certain ideas of what a player may become, and I find it very easy to lose the forest for the trees. Doing something like this uh forces me, at least speaking only for myself, to remember what really matters in the league. If you rank all, if you try to do it, if what whoever is listening, if you try to do this at home and you find yourself agreeing or disagreeing, this really isn't like clickbaity. That's not the goal of any of this or anything on my show. But if you try to do this yourself and you find how difficult it is ranking, I don't know, Tumani Kamara versus Donovan Clingan as two teammates. Maybe they'll come up today, maybe they won't. And you have to sort of make those distinctions, and you see what distinctions you make across position, across archetype. You start to see what is harder to find in the league than it might seem. What is rarer to come across, not in just one draft class, but in three draft classes. It can start to inform your actual philosophy and how players in an incoming class stack up. So to me, this has legitimate use and it's not just for the fun of it, though it would be worth it just for the fun of it. So with that sort of, you know, rambling, blathering description of why I think this is a nice exercise to do. Any other thoughts from you, Sam, before we kick off?
No, not really. I kind of echo what you said, and then my process of putting this list together, and we'll go through in detail as we list out the players, is start by draft class. And for 2025, I haven't really changed much based on my opinion coming into the season. And then, so I start with basically my draft boards from the last three drafts.
Mm,
2025 is not going to change so much. And then from there, I go into, basketball reference and like EPM stats just to scan through and make sure I didn't miss anybody that I might not have had originally, high on my board. For example, Tumani Kamara was one that you mentioned that's obviously outplayed his draft slot. Was a guy I did like and actually did pick as an all rookie candidate back in the day, but still has outplayed that and is an awesome player now. So that's kind of the process that I go through. And then I start listing them out, and I've kind of tiered out. I've ranked out to number 18. And then I have from there a big group of 15 guys after that that I didn't rank, but would, consider on the long list there.
yeah, and that makes sense. Like again, when you think about it being three draft classes as we go through here, and by the way, since this is redraft format, like 2025 is not behind the eight ball because they haven't added
Yeah.
to their resume. This is about future value, who we would want to draft. And this is not, we haven't exchanged lists. So Sam and I are not forming a team. His list might look entirely different from mine, and whatever this composite comes out as is just, draft format one after the other after the other. But since we're going to about 20 picks or so, you divide by three, that's going to be on average what the top six or top seven is over three draft classes. So we are still, even when we get to the very end of our list, are still talking about high lottery talents. So if anyone out there is talking about the disrespect we're showing to any player that you might think that we're disrespecting, just save it for the guys we don't even mention. That's the players that we're disrespecting on your rubric because we aren't even mentioning them at all. But if we mention your name, if we mention a player's name, it means we like that player very much. Otherwise, he would not make the list. So, with all that said, would you want to go odds or evens here, Sam? Who do you want?
I'll go evens since I think that's a little more interesting.
I I wanted to leave it to you because I there's an argument for either being more interesting because I kind of want to know who the third overall pick is
Okay.
here.
That's fair.
But
Yeah.
no, that's okay. I'm happy to do it. I know who mine's gonna be. So for with the first overall pick, I'll take Victor Wembanyama. I mean, the only thing really interesting to say about Wembanyama, as far as ranking goes, is whether or not there's any concern about his health. And that, to me, is among the least interesting things to discuss on a podcast because I don't know what the hell I'm talking about when it comes to his health. So I just hope that his mild calf strain is mild, But to me, there isn't really any much debate to have between him and anyone else. I don't want to spoil the rest of either of our lists. So Victor Wembanyama, number one with a bullet, was number one at the time. It's as consensus as it gets. So Victor Wembanyama, number one. Who do you have number two?
I have Cooper Flagg number 2.
Okay. I think
So
still
haven't been
very,
dissuaded
very
off of that.
consensus. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
But uh I would say with Cooper, uh, did you have him in a tier of his own? I'll ask you that
I
question.
I did have him in a tier of his own, but I don't think it's certainly not as definitive as Wemby, obviously, and like a tier, 2 tiers above anyone else. I have another tier coming up of 3 guys, and I would almost say that Cooper Flagg's like a half tier above those guys. I think the main thing with him is we just forget how young he is, first
Mm-hmm.
of all, and then two, obviously, I'm sure you've talked about it on past episodes, both the age factor and then him coming into this situation, being forced to handle the ball, play further away from the rim, and be playing uh, on a team that is playing in a very tough Western Conference, has a lot of big, doesn't have the spacing, and he's going to have to learn and improve to shoot. So those are kind of the things that I think about. But with him, I certainly haven't been dissuaded off of him as a prospect, and having him number 2 here wasn't as easy as Wemby at number 1, but was certainly still pretty locked in for me.
Yeah. He would be my number two as well. And since I spoke about him I did a preseason episode on him and that fit in Dallas with Lauren Gunn that you referenced and how we were kind of skeptical about that. Spoke about him in the rookies episode, I guess a couple weeks ago that I recorded with Nathan, so won't belabor it. But I also had him in a tier of his own. I'll say that my pick at number three here would be Amen Thompson. That would be my selection. And so I guess if you're contrasting Cooper versus Amen, and we're both taking Cooper, this is where I think this conversation can get a little interesting. So,
Yeah.
first of all, I think that he was an all defense player last year. He should be an all defense player any year in which he hits sort of the game's limit.
Mhm.
And there's a very good case to be made that he's already, the best wing defender in the NBA, if not very, very close to it, and should be that throughout the entirety of his prime. Uh, Cooper, even though he had this amazing defensive reputation and is, I think, doing very, very well, especially, 18 years old, like you referenced with his age, an excellent sort of defensive prospect. I view Amen as having a higher ultimate defensive ceiling than Cooper. I think he is just a better, more fluid athlete, more capable of locking up in isolation, whereas I think Cooper thrives more as a help defender, as a rotator, uh, coming in from the weak side or Xing out to a shooter. Uh, I think Amen can basically do everything Cooper can do, but is just a little bit twitchier and has sort of those ISO lockdown chops. So Amen has a lot going for him, and I think could make an argument for that number two spot for me.
Mhm.
Uh, Cooper, though, when you mention the age, came into the league basically, oh gosh, since he's about to turn 19, and I think the Thompson twins were turning 21 the January of their rookie year. He's basically 2 years younger than Amen was as a rookie. And again, if you
Mhm.
just want to chart it that way and sort of project out on the age curve, which is a very popular thing to do in our space, you can see where Cooper is trending just in terms of sort of all court impact and burden on offense and defense. Amen's very gifted playmaker, but that shot is always going to be a question for him. And I think Cooper's ability as both an on and off ball offensive player is what ultimately lifts him above Amen Thompson. I think Amen in that weirdo Rockets offense is like the ultimate sledgehammer if he's sort of in the dunker spot or if he's cutting and there's been some sort of pick and roll action with Durant and Şengün or something at the top of the key where someone gets the ball in the short roll, he is sort of the ultimate hammer there. And so it's not as though he has no off ball value, but you have to get so creative with him to get around the lack of a 3-point shot that I am still more optimistic that Cooper, not a knockdown guy, but I think much more promising of a shooter at an earlier age. Uh, you can feel more comfortable in Cooper's ultimate offensive fate for purposes of this exercise. But both outstanding prospects. Amen will be an all-star probably this year, and again, all defense. Going to be in the Western Conference playoffs for a long time, and just does a lot of things to affect winning. And I think in ways that project towards deep in the playoffs. So he would be my number 3. Would he have been your number 3?
Yep, yeah, I have him third as well. So first among this group of three guys here. Like you said, I agree with everything you said. For me, yeah, he's one of the best wing defenders, maybe the best individual athlete in the NBA as well. Was already first team all defense and fifth in defensive player of the year voting last year, and it'll be, similar for the foreseeable future for him. For Cooper Flagg, I think I've talked about this a little bit, but my comparison with him is Jimmy Butler plus 2 inches. And what I mean by that is his superpower is doing all the role player things really well. And so, yeah, he's not going to be the individual lockdown defender that Amen Thompson is. And so I agree that his defensive ceiling, while still high, he's just not going to be the individual shutdown wing defender with that level of athleticism that Amen Thompson is. But he still should be, based on what we've seen to date, a very good team defender that impacts winning in all the ways that you want him to. And then, yeah, his just based on his age, what he's shown, what he showed last year at Duke, his offensive ceiling is higher at this point in time. Again, he's much earlier on the age curve. He's still got to prove it in the NBA. And that's, again, some of the difficulty ranking here. But that's why I still have Flagg at 2, and then Amen Thompson right behind him again. Like I said, probably a half tier behind him at number 3. And he's in a really good spot, Amen Thompson, in Houston, where he's got elite shooting and KD and Reed Shepherd next to him, a playmaking big in Şengün. And so that does help him a little bit. But at the same time, we've seen that Amen Thompson, last year was one of the best players already on the team and driving winning, even in the playoffs in that series against Golden State.
Yep. Yep. I agree. All right. I hope we get a little spicier here, but you're up for
Yeah.
number 4. Go ahead, Sam.
So I'm going from one Rocket to another, and I'm going with Reed Shepherd here at number 4.
Hey, that is spicy. Go off with Reed.
Yeah, so I don't know how spicy that is, but I mean it's probably spicy because his NBA success is more recent. But I had him as the number one prospect in that draft. Obviously, what most considered a weaker draft at the time. It's looking, pretty deep at this point in time now. But then just what we've seen recently is that he just has probably the highest offensive ceiling, I would say, of anybody on the board at this point, and that I value. The shooting off the bounce from 3, the shooting off the bounce from mid range, that combined, with the defensive playmaking that he showed going back to Kentucky. For anyone that's kind of a stat-based guy, what he did at Kentucky kind of blew a lot of the numbers out of the water, and because of that, I had him ranked as my top prospect. And so, yeah, that statistical profile I saw in college, what I've seen from him in the 2 summer leagues, but then more importantly now to kind of support that, we've seen him just kind of go nuclear for a little bit of time here finally in the NBA. It takes some of these guys that are going to be these offensive stars, especially maybe smaller guards, to get that confidence. But now that he's found it, I'm not going to say that he's just going to sustain this. It's not going to be completely linear, but we've seen, what his ceiling can look like. And so that's why I've got him at number 4.
Okay. And so let's be clear here because I believe he's only been inserted into the starting lineup over the last like couple of games, if
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
mistaken. And
yeah.
so, it obviously has looked very good. He's really been on a tear for the last, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games is when he's really started ripping all this stuff off and looks like he's averaging in that nine, maybe around 17, maybe 17, 4 and 4, with
Hmm.
a healthy amount of deflections, steals and blocks. And that is kind of who he was at Kentucky. I mean, I
Yeah.
had Reed third in that draft. I guess you'll see sort of who else I would have had at the top of the draft in this exercise. But when you have him ahead of all, like, just to name some other players that we will get to over the course of this, but like Brandon Miller is, neither one of us have mentioned yet. Dylan Harper, neither one of us have mentioned yet. Uh, Con Knipple obviously having a great start to his career. With Reed, because he is smaller than all those guys, uh, what do you think his ultimate ceiling is as a player? I imagine, obviously, starting point guard for a team that could go deep in the playoffs, but like, do you see all NBA with him? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think he can be all NBA. And I guess part of this question is how much are we factoring in the current their current situation? Because he's playing next to, again, like we just said, he and Amin Thompson complement each other so well in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. Um, I think though that what I look at is he's got superstar talent offensively. To what extent you want to debate that, that's fine. But then from there, my next question is he good enough defensively that he's just not going to be a liability? Like, does he clearly clear the Trey Young threshold or whatever bad guard that you want to put in there that's just not going to be good enough to really construct a relevant, like solid enough defense? And I think he clearly does that. He's fitting into a good defense in Houston, and he is an elite defensive playmaker. So he clears those bars. And again, I just value, to me, the offensive ceiling, I think, is as high as anyone. But I understand that he hasn't put as much on paper in terms of NBA results to date. So that's some of the give and take of doing this exercise. Some of that's still relying on my pre-draft priors, but I think some of that's been validated over the numbers that he's put up, both from the raw numbers and then the advanced numbers. The EPM are stuff that few guys have done, again, albeit over like only a month, to 6 weeks. So to answer your question, yes, I think he does have all NBA upside. And I think he clears that defensive threshold of, yes, he's a small guard, but he's not going to kill you. He's not going to prevent you from being a solid enough defense, in my opinion.
Okay, I'm gonna keep nudging here because Reed's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. When you
Yeah.
say not going to prevent you from being solid enough, do you mean solid enough to like win the title or win the West? I mean, because that's what his team has designs on doing. So it's a lot to ask for in his second
Yeah.
year for him to be that good. This is projecting forward, but you think that his his game could survive that deep, over the course of, through his prime and
Yeah,
everything.
I think so. And I kind of liken him to, and I'm not saying he's going to be as good as Tyrese Halliburton offensively, but kind of the same thing where, yeah, you can take advantage of him one on one, but he's a very smart player and an elite defensive playmaker. And Indiana was good enough to take it to a game 7. Now, is he going to be as good as Halliburton was offensively last year? I'm not saying that, but that's kind of similar to what I envision of, yeah, he can fit in well enough to win the title. He clears that threshold for me, and at least he provides certainly some value with the defensive playmaking. And Houston's got the guys around him to make it work. The advanced analytics like him defensively, probably more than you would kind of think. Mainly, again, the defensive playmaking, the steal rate is so good going all the way back to college, and that's translated
Mhm.
to the NBA. But yeah, I would say that he's good enough that if you've got the right personnel around him, like I think Houston does, again, do I think they're going to get by OKC this year? That's a different question because OKC is an all-time team. But in a vacuum, like in an average year, I would say that if you put the right pieces around him, then, and this is projecting, I'm not even saying that this year that's going to be the case, but
Right,
if we're
right,
thinking
right.
about over the course of his career, I would say I'm projecting that he can be good enough to be an average defensive point guard.
Okay. Okay. I would agree with the that he can be an average defensive point guard, like on balance, if it all comes out in the wash. What makes Reed so interesting is that he, traditionally speaking, if you're going to be, this high and you took him fourth, which means
Mhm.
average draft, he's like a number 2 overall pick if we're averaging these last three.
Mhm.
Uh, if you're going to be that good, typically you either need to have an offense revolve around you, around your offensive gifts, where your usage is way up and the team is like you are basically the leader of a team's offense. The team is sort of taking on your personality if you're a point guard, as the Pacers took on Halliburton's play style and personality. Or I guess or you have physical traits that can just sort of overwhelm the competition. And Reed is in this really interesting space where I think there's a healthy amount of debate as to whether or not he checks either box. It is clear that he
Mhm.
is extremely gifted. Uh, as far as an offense ever revolving itself around Reed and putting the ball in his hands to the point where he's a true high usage lead guard, I'm actually pretty skeptical of that being the case. Even at Kentucky, he was maybe not all the way a connector because he was brought off the bench and there were times when he sort of took more of a leading role there. But he had Dillingham on his team also sopping up a lot of usage, and he was very content, and I think is very content to just sort of make whatever he deems the right play. Very unselfish in that respect. It's just a matter of as he goes through the NBA, gets his reps under his belt, and is, responding to his coaches, whether or not he embraces the right play as being score first more. How often is he going to come to the conclusion that, like, it's on me. The best thing for this offense is for me to go cook. And I think even in like this little stretch here, he scored 31 his last game, 27 a couple games before that. You see him be more aggressive, especially in getting his three ball off and in the middle of the floor. That sort of foul line elbow area. Because another thing about Reed is that going back to Kentucky, he wasn't like a nonstop rim seeker on his drives. If you showed him a body or if you cut off a driving lane, he would get off the ball, relocate, and just kind of start over again. And
Mhm.
whether or not he has that sort of not killer instinct, because I do think he is a killer competitor, but that killer move, that stuff that is just such easy money for him, that sort of signature shot or signature spot on the floor that can be his down the stretch of games to close teams out, whatever, that thing that all the stars have. That will be interesting to track. He has so much athletic pop in terms of getting off the ground quickly. He had a great vertical at the combine. He was a great combine athlete, but he's not an above the rim, acrobatic dunker because of his height. But he can rise up like quicker than his defender can react in a very pronounced way. So if there's something with that sort of elbow free throw jumper, kind of in a Chris Paul kind of way, that he can make his, then I think these pathways become much more concrete. Because the other thing I said, I guess I just touched on it a little bit, is about like that sort of athletic exceptionalism. I think he is a very good guard athlete, and he's this white kid, and he's 20 years old, so you can call him sneaky athletic or underrated or whatever synonym you want to use. But he's very good, but he is never going to be an elite athlete by NBA point guard standards. And so, in order for him to overwhelm people, or his version of overwhelming people. I think it's going to need to be not like it's going to have to be in sort of this subtle way. Like SGA is an overwhelming athlete in his own way because he's so fluid and no one can match his sort of fluidity with getting to his spots and getting off the ground. It's like a different kind of athleticism. Reed does not have that same fluidity, but he has all that like short area pop, which I think translates to his steal and block numbers, on the other end of the floor. That's the margin that he's just going to have to spam in order to like reach this kind of an outcome. I think it is very much on the table for him. I had him in the next couple of picks, but I just wanted those are my thoughts on him about if you really want to say this is an all NBA kind of talent.
Yeah, no, it's all fair, and from here on out, I think there's going to be a lot of debate. There's very little that's straightforward. I guess the final thing for me on him that I would say is, um, I think it's more likely that he becomes a star offensive player. What do we want to say? Top 15 offensive player in the NBA than just looking at my list. Then Buzelis or Brandon Miller becomes like a star, like the next Paul George star wing player.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of why. And again, I value that offensive ceiling, and we've seen the nuclear levels he's gotten to recently. To your point, doesn't get all the way to the rim as much as I'd like, but he does, again, like you said, he's flashed that kind of leaning back, fading Chris Paul mid-range jumper. He got to it a couple times against Golden State. And if he's just going to be this level of efficient, whether that's your first or second option, um, I think it's going to be very valuable, even if he doesn't necessarily become like the next Steph Curry, Tyrese Halliburton hybrid, which obviously is more likely than not he doesn't reach those highs.
That'd be nice. If he does, this ranking's probably too low if he's a
Yeah,
Steph Curry, Tyrese Halliburton hybrid.
yeah.
Uh, but in that mold of player, I will say, unless you have any other notes on him.
Nope, nope.
Okay, so I guess the number fifth pick here, I would take Con Knipple.
Wow. The fact that you took I thought I was the world's biggest Nipple fan. I had him sixth, but I think I've watched the Hornets more than any other team this year, just because I'm obsessed with how good he is. He
Yeah.
was my favorite player in the draft last year, so I had him ranked third in the draft last year after Flagg and then VJ Edgecombe, and I'm like
Oh,
back
interesting.
and forth between VJ Edgecombe and Knipple, but he's just such a unique player, and we can talk about him now. But I think a lot of people just assumed he was like a 6'5" white shooter, and that's not really what he is.
Well, I
He
mean, he
he
is
is an
all three of
incredible
those things.
shooter,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Very
but he
six
just
five, very white, very a
very
shooter.
good
That's
shooter.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but he just he understands basketball so well, and that's why I enjoy watching him. Just the angles that he scores at offensively, he just is always making the right decision and the right pass. You've seen him get sped up a little bit as a young guard in the NBA, but he just has that preternatural feel. That some of it's natural, some of it's just playing a ton of basketball and being raised in a basketball family, that I just enjoy watching how he plays. He makes the most of his physical gifts, but he's so skilled and so smart, and he can fit in next to anybody. But I think and I hope we'll get to see him jack the usage up a little bit, like we saw at Duke when Cooper Flagg was hurt. It's like, yeah, Con can score 25 and kind of carry us offensively if we need to. He can also throttle that down and be either a spacer or running off screens on the weak side. He'll also sneak in for like an offensive rebound when we need it. He'll always make the right pass. He's like a really good interior passer, lob passer, but can also make the drive and kick out to three. So he really just kind of greases the wheels offensively and for any team that he plays for. So I'm sad I didn't get to pick him, but he's probably my favorite player to watch just because of that feel, like I said, and just kind of seeing him figure out how much he can do in the NBA right now is really fun.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I could tell you had that
I'm
locked and
hurt.
loaded.
Yeah.
I apologize, Sam, but no, yeah, I am very guilty of being a con guy for quite some time. I had con rank second on my board. I feel like I know that it's not always the same people listening to my podcast every episode, and there's no harm in repeating some thoughts here and there. But I really have spoken about Khan a lot, going back to God, probably March was when I first was like thought I saw a real star path in him. You know, right around that time pre-tournament. Probably around that ACC tournament time. Although I don't think it was just like I don't think it's not as though I watched that tournament and then came to that conclusion. But you know, he's played 19 games in the NBA. So, you know, some stat lines he's already recorded. You know, 24, 6 and 5, 20, 12 and 2, 30, 8 and 3, 19, 10 and 9, 32, 3 and 3 with 3 steals, 28, 8 and 7, 28, 6 and 3, you know, 24, 7, 1 and 3, all on good efficiency. Like it's just he has established a baseline where I think when you say you look forward to him jacking the usage up, I mean, LaMelo was out for a lot of that time when they started giving him more to do. And it's it's a pretty simple idea. The idea is if he is efficient and his efficiency remains the more you put on his plate, it is the organization's job, really their mandate, to put as much on his plate as he can really handle. Because that's what, you know, that's what a star is. A star is someone who holds a lot of responsibility, usually a lot of offensive responsibility, without sacrificing any scoring efficiency or any sort of like decision making. And Khan is such a green flag in those two areas because I actually think he is more gifted as a scorer than Reed. Just because I think his size affords him a little bit as good an athlete as Reed is. But I think that he is going to have a lot of strength, just natural strength through his body, and the ability to leverage that strength in a lot of ways that Reed will not have. Like Reed's jumper really is gonna have to, I think, carry him very, very far. I think Khan, like I said, every bit the shooter that Reed is, if not better, but with that sort of intermediate feel at such an advanced stage already, that I can more easily see a team entrusting more of their offense to him. And that is what, like, I mean, I guess I don't want to be too redundant, but that's how I think if he's 20 years old and he's doing this already, then however the LaMelo situation resolves itself, whether he stays or goes or pouts some more or whatever, that by the time Khan is 24, 25, the game is going to seem very easy for him on offense, where he will be able to get to his spots, whether that's off the catch and driving, or whether that's working himself open off the ball and using his gravity that way as sort of a Steph Curry disciple, or getting himself in the short roll because he's such a good screener. Like there's not an easy way to guard him. There's not an easy like scouting report way to try to neutralize him. And as soon as the Hornets filter Khan's approach through the rest of their team and they start surrounding him with guys who play like him, and you know, I think that process usually happens more quickly than we might give it credit for. I think it might be 12 months and you'll have a team that can run with him. That's when it'll really shine. Like this is, I'm sure the Hornets believed in him, but I'm sure this is already exceeding their expectations. So once I think I should say, now that they've seen what he can do, they're gonna, I think, hit the accelerator on making sure the team just sort of revolves around him. Like I said, they've got stuff to figure out, but it'll get figured out more quickly than I guess it'll get figured out more quickly than meets the eye. And so that's my 2 cents for this episode on Khan.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. It's kind of double-edged sword in that I've loved some of the stuff they've done with him, like him screening in the middle of the floor and then either rolling to the rim and then, making the right play or popping out for three has been a really fun way to get him utilized. But at the same time, kind of hoping Miles Bridges isn't on the team next year,
Of course,
or they
yeah.
figure out, the right players to put around him. And I'm a little bit lower on LaMelo, and Brandon Miller is a big question mark moving forward. But yeah, I agree. Big Con Knipple fan. So glad we're part of the same fan base there. So I'm up at 6, right?
Yes, you are.
Yep.
So off the
So
board so far, our top five were Victor Wembanyama, Cooper Flagg, Amen Thompson, Reed Shepard, Conkinipple. And now you're
okay.
up at six.
So I'll take Stephon Castle here with this pick.
Okay. Okay. Go. He was in the neighborhood for me, but go for it.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird for me because he, Amen, and Asar are the super talented perimeter players that can't shoot that I was lower than consensus on coming into the draft for that reason. But they've been very effective in the things they were supposed to do well, but very obviously aren't shooting either. So, but now
Hmm.
I'm kind of higher than I was. So it's kind of an interesting thing for me to maybe think about. But I just think both the impacts and the raw numbers have been so good already in terms of points, rebounds, assists. He does all of that. He's not quite Amen Thompson just because he's not quite that level of athlete. Nobody really is, but he's like the next tier down in terms of just stick him on a guy on the perimeter and he's going to lock that guy up pretty much. So, future all defense guy should be pretty much every year, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future.
Hmm.
And especially with Wembanyama behind him, he just can play with that extra level of aggressiveness on the ball that he likes to do already. And then I know it's kind of it's an intangible, but he just has that toughness, but also that fearlessness that he just goes at guys that I really enjoy that. But just and I kind of one of the things that I think about as I go through this list is would the team that this guy's on trade him for like the next guy that I'm considering on this list? Kind of
Right.
like a trade value thing when we think about their future value. And so I think about Steph Castle versus Dylan Harper, who's in the next few guys that I'd be considering. And I just think, and maybe you can kind of provide what you think about from that perspective. But with what Steph Castle has already shown he can do, I just think that if they had to pick one of the two guys, it's hard for me to imagine that they would push Steph Castle aside at this point, just with what he's already shown to date in the NBA.
Um,
Do you agree or disagree with that?
they're on the same team, so trade value takes on sort of a different deal for them. I think
Like, which guy would they prioritize right now moving forward? Dylan Harper was obviously drafted a little bit higher, but Stephon Castle's already, done
so. I
this
had
amount.
Castle and Harper back to back in this exercise.
Yeah, which is
Um,
why I bring it up. Yeah,
yeah. I'll get into it more whenever we arrive on Harper, but I would say that they'd probably prioritize Castle because like Castle's got there first. Is I think there's a
yeah,
natural tendency when you have the intangibles that Castle has. I mean, both those guys have intangibles, but Castle is like UConn national champion,
yeah,
consistent winner, absolute dog. Like of you talk about like overwhelming physically. They're both gifted physically, but Castle is more of an overwhelming physical talent than Harper is, in my opinion. And so when you chain all that together, I think that that's the sort of like upside that teams really, really like to bank on and that they're very, very reluctant to trade away, especially the athletic exceptionalism, that Castle has. Because Castle is, for his age and whatever, I mean, he is just among the strongest guards you can ever imagine, just physically
yeah.
strongest guards, an absolute monster. So I think they would give him the edge because of that. I don't know that that means that I necessarily prefer him as an overall winning piece to Harper, but it's very close. Like you certainly have the argument for it. Um, what do you think? I mean, obviously you think they would prefer Castle, but like, why do
Yeah.
you think they would?
Yeah. So this year so far, 17.6 rebounds, almost 8 assists, shooting 50% from the field, only 24% from three. EPM really likes him, obviously, because he's an elite defender mainly. I had Steph Castle 2 spots ahead of Dylan Harper on my rankings, and a lot of that is there are some cases where I value the upside, but with Steph Castle, he's already just proved that he's already a good NBA player. So that's just kind of the tiebreaker for me, where we just haven't
Yeah.
seen that from Dylan Harper yet. So maybe it's going a little bit conservative on that. Whereas, yes, I would say Dylan Harper still has the higher ceiling offensively for sure, as like a ball handler, scorer, obviously, hopefully a better shooter than Stephon Castle has shown. So I get that, but I think fitting into a good winning team, Stephon Castle's already proven that, and so that's why I give him the slight edge, but it's a close one.
So there's been there's sort of a split here because and you mentioned it by grouping him with Amen. We have a couple guys who are just sort of like nuclear efficiency bets in Reed and Khan, and a couple
Yep.
guys who have this unbelievable athletic exceptionalism with, I guess, Cooper, Amen, and Castle in their own way, and then Wemby's on his own planet. I would say that where you a conclusion to draw from these first set of picks is that the NBA, the bar is rising in both directions in terms of like what a winning player actually is. And again, this is six guys, so we're talking about top three picks on average, or top two picks on average over the last three drafts. But like Castle and Thompson are not perfect players. Like they have warts that could be exploited in a hypothetical playoff matchup or in like over the course of a regular season. Like you have to be very purposeful with how you entrust Castle or Amen with an offense because there will be a scouting report on both of them. So I think that I was lower on Castle in the draft because of that shooting. And I also didn't see a ton of creativity in how he drove. I thought he wasn't the most fluid guy, didn't have the deepest bag. And it was weird because he was clearly filling a role in UConn that he thought that he could surpass in the NBA. What has impressed me most about him offensively has been again that strength that I mentioned, and that manifests itself in his ability to draw fouls and his ability to stop on a dime, like right under the hoop to create an easy look for himself because he can just absorb all that force and just stop a drive, which is like a very unique, crazy thing to see. Um, and it's the fact that his feel is so good. He like a lot of players who fulfilled a supporting role in college. He said during the draft process, he's like, I'm a point guard. I'm a point guard. Like I can handle point guard duties. And I viewed that with a little bit of like okay, that's what everyone says. But he legitimately can. His the way that he sees the game on offense and defense, and the way that he can floor map, the way that he can anticipate, uh, he is like Knipple, but in a much different way. He's just sort of like a correct play machine. I prefer Knipple to him long term because like I said, I would rather bet on the nuclear offensive talent if we're going between two 6'5" guys. But the ability to consistently keep a defense in rotation and to take so much away from an opposing offense. Yeah, it's an incredibly appealing package. And if you are envisioning some playoff series where the Spurs are, against maybe even the Rockets or anyone else, like Castle is just such a physical load to deal with game after game after game. I think it's never going to be perfect with him, but there's enough there to where you can imagine the Spurs winning playoff series in part because of Castle. And when they first drafted him, I thought they would have to kind of win in spite of him, where like the shooting was just going to be so much of a problem. Wembanyama helps cure that because he's such a crazy, floor warper geometrically, such a matchup advantage. But I underestimated the degree to which I think Castle can really drive a team through his defense and through his offensive decision making and through his driving. So I I think he is really like a fascinating player. I think that he is a credit to that 2024 class, which you apparently love. Look at you taking all these 2024 guys for such a maligned class. But
Yeah, I have a pretty big break after this, but we have in terms of the 24 class, but I did have those two guys pretty high.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really, really cool player. And I had not given him his full flowers on my podcast, so I'm glad that you brought him up so that I could do that. Anything else you want to bring up about him, about stuff? Where do you think that jumper's going? How good do you think it could be?
I'm still pretty concerned for both, Amen more so, but Stephon Castle. It does feel like when I watch him though that like late in the game, if he pulls up from three just because of that gamer intangible fearlessness, I feel like he's just gonna make it.
It's another Jimmy
He's
Butler
got he's
characteristic.
Jimmy Butler. He kind of yeah, Jalen Suggs kind of has that too as well, where it's like, yeah, I'm just taking this and gonna make it. Um, it is interesting. We've talked about physical strength as like an important characteristic that certain guys have in the modern NBA, and Steph Castle has that. Khan has that. Like Dylan Harper, we're going to talk about in a minute. Even Flagg, for being a young player, has that for an 18-year-old. Like Amen Thompson's his own physical kind of specimen. But that's kind of an interesting that stood out to me over these first few picks too.
Yep. That I tried to hit on that and I think I went on like a tangent, but
Yeah.
in terms of what makes a winning player, physical strength and offensive feel or just overall feel to the point where a team can really entrust you with decision making. Like I love Buzelis, but Buzelis right now in Chicago, and we'll get to him when we get to him. Like since Kobe White has come back and they have all these guards they rotate through, Trey Jones plays, Desunmu plays, Kobe and Giddy obviously start. You know, Buzelis ends up in the corner a lot, and there's a version of that team that revolves more around his scoring game. But since Buzelis is not a natural playmaker and has never been a natural playmaker, the team, which is trying to win, doesn't necessarily feel comfortable giving him a lot of decisions to make offensively. He can still do valuable offensive things. And maybe if he were on a worse team, he'd have a longer runway to develop that part of his game. But something about this exercise is that it does force you to consider all of that. And the fact that Castle has the Spurs trust and that they were, very good when Wembanyama was healthy is notable. And they're still winning games now without him. So that feel component is a real separator, really, really important when going through all this stuff and important to keep in mind, as you look to 2026 and beyond. Um, yeah. Okay. So I guess I'm up with number 7 now.
Yep.
Okay. I think I know who I got here. Just gotta make sure. As we talk about, yeah, I know how I'm going. As we talk about physical strength, and that being a separator, the sort of the bar rising as to what a dominant player looks like. I know who I have is not who you had because you said you had a pretty big drop off in 2024. I'm going with Zach Edey. Yeah, I would take him number
Oh,
7.
whoa. Okay. Yeah, that's the
Where,
biggest gap. I have him 18th. So
but he made your list, and
he
that's
did.
what
He was the
pumps me
last
up.
guy on my list. And the reason I was debating him having him on the list, and then I pulled up like EPM and the advanced stats, and I was like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
should
Well,
probably have him on there.
yeah, tell the
But
people what it said.
yeah, I mean, I just pulled up EPM and sorted for guys from the last 3 draft classes, and he was number 2 behind Wemby. So I was
There you
like,
go.
yeah, probably should have him on there. 99th percentile defensive EPM, 76th percentile offensively. And I know he's been suffering from some of the injury ailments that have kind of limited his playing time. But when we've seen him come back recently, Memphis has started to win games again.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'll let you do your Edie spiel, but I'm glad I righted my wrong and added him onto the end of my list
So
there.
Edie was my number one player in that draft at the time, and he would be my number one player like in this list from 2024, even though we've already talked about Reed and Castle. And even though I like those guys, they'd be my 2 and 3. But I I just my thing at the draft, my reason I had him where I had him was that I thought that he was the best bet to be a dominant offensive player in that class. And that came from the fact that he was clearly a dominant offensive player at Purdue, in college. He was the most
Yeah.
dominant offensive player in college basketball for multiple years running before he entered the league. And I thought that the skills that he had were like real legitimate NBA skills, that it wasn't just by virtue of his size. His size is an amplifier, obviously, but I thought his touch was legitimate. His athletic testing at the combine showed that he wasn't a stiff, though I think if you watch the tape, you knew he wasn't a stiff. You knew that he was durable, that he could play all day and all night, and that's what I thought was a separator between him and Klingon, was that Klingon could never really play 30 minutes a night at UConn over the course of 2 years. Barely even 25 minutes a night, and he's still kind of battling that in Portland. Hopefully he gets through it. But Purdue's offense was also pretty conservative and going through him. And a lot of people saw that, I think, as a drawback to his NBA profile and potential, because they viewed him as sort of this guy who was late to develop to basketball, and so he's sort of this throwback big in this different kind of era. But my thought on him, and credit to Matt Powers, who I had on my podcast from Swish Theory, who was the first one who really viewed Edie in this more creative manner. But my thought on him was just that, like, a creative offense can do more creative things with him. You don't know what Edie can do until you give him the chance to do more than what he was doing at Purdue as like this post up heavy big. But to me, the path to offensive dominance is knowing that there are areas of the floor that you can draw gravity from. And Edie around the rim is clearly a gravitational force on offense. Like, clearly, it is. I always knew it was going to be very difficult for like one guy to handle him one-on-one down low. And defenses react to rim threats. They just do. It's still the most valuable area of the floor. And if you have a guy who can really finish there and who can move and has soft enough hands to make himself available down there, then you're going to be in business. And so that's sort of it, to me, it was just sort of a straight line to a very effective player. The fact that when he's been healthy, he's already shown like 3-point touch and confidence, like pretty immediately his rookie year, and it's carried over as well, is, the icing on the cake. And I think also icing on the cake is the fact that right around the time he got drafted, it became so in vogue to start multiple bigs again in the NBA, as like teams came around to offensive rebounds as something to really seek out. For so many years, offensive rebounds were intentionally sacrificed by teams in favor of transition defense, and that's no longer the case. And as such a dominant rebounder, I would say that among all these players that we're talking about, Wembanyama included, I think that Edie is the most dominant rebounder from these 3 years. That is another like real clear pathway to value. He is like, he's not going to be your traditional hub who's making tons of decisions. I know we've spoken about decision making as sort of a real turnkey for a lot of these players, but he's just so hard to handle when he has the ball in his spots, and it's so easy for him to set up in his spots that, to me, like, his offensive value is more or less guaranteed. You mentioned the defensive EPM, and I know they probably love him because of his rebounding, those stats,
Yeah.
but he's in good shape, man. And like, this ankle surgery, he says worked wonders on him, and that he was always kind of hobbled last year. With bigs and lower leg stuff, you always want to make sure it's not going to recur. But if that's really behind him and his mobility is more in line with what he tested at the combine, then he doesn't need to be the most explosive guy in the world. With his wingspan and his size, he'll deter plenty at the rim and be very effective at it. That's not to say you can't cook up a matchup that makes it difficult for him. Obviously, as a rookie, OKC swept the Grizzlies in the playoffs, but you could cook up a matchup that makes it difficult for Amen Thompson. The the fact that there's ways to plan for some of these guys is not going to dissuade me when there's so much going for a particular player. And so that's why I've got Edie where I've got him.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I'm a big Warriors fan, so my kind of lasting impression was when they played in the play-in game last year that Edie was made
Yeah.
to look bad. He looked like a fish out of water trying to guard Jimmy Butler pump fakes and Steph Curry coming off screens. So that's kind of imprinted on my mind, followed by them getting swept by the Thunder. That
Didn't he have
combined with
like didn't he have like 18 and 12 in that game? Like, I know that
against the
happened.
Warriors,
I
maybe
believe he
he
did
I think he
something good,
did. In the
but
second half, he did better. But the first half, it was kind of like ugly. They were just taking advantage of him on the defensive end. But that combined with being a little out of sight, out of mind with his injuries lately, and then the other part is yeah, the double bigs have come back to me. I still prefer versatility, and so the wing players, the guard players. So I still very much value size, but I value versatile size, and so that's why I'm a little bit lower on Zach Edey
no,
personally. But
it's a very fair point. Like, you do have to build your team in a certain way with him.
yeah,
But what
exactly.
you said earlier about, like, you don't know the Buzelis and Brandon Miller are going to become the next great wing. That's what I am
Yeah.
thinking of as well. Because I agree about that. I don't think they are in an athletic class with, like, that Paul George was in, or
Mhm.
that obviously Kawhi Leonard is even more of a ridiculous athlete. But, like, they're not going to be near top of the league for their position group in any particular physical characteristic. Whereas I know that Edie will among bigs. And so that, again, that pathway to dominance relative to your counterpart is a big reason why I give Edie the edge over some of those guys.
Yeah. I'm interested to see where you come in on some of these other centers as well. I think I'm kind of lower across the board on all of them, but there are a lot of like pretty good to decent centers and some of them very centers with a lot of size. So
Yeah.
interested to
I
see
mean,
where that
that
goes.
Edie's draft, there's 4 or 5 centers in that draft that might appear on this list. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I hinted at this one. This is pretty much a pure upside, from the 2025 class. So swinging back that way, I mentioned VJ Edgecombe was who I
Hmm.
had number 2 in that draft. And so he obviously started out completely gangbusters to start out his rookie year. And it has since, as we could have all predicted, come back to earth in terms of the efficiency. He's still, unsurprisingly playing the most minutes per game out of anybody in this player pool, which I thought was interesting and funny. But obviously, a breathtaking athlete, um, versatile guard. Um, I think obviously I liked him coming into the draft last year, and then his hot start to this year did not dissuade me off of that position. And so just as I was putting together my draft board last year, I have more of just like a statistical formula that I run it through, um, rather than amending my board after every game. And so as I did that, I didn't really know where all the different guys were going to end up. And I was pretty surprised that Edgecombe ended up as high as he did based on the different kind of tenets that I value and the different numbers that I value. But I think he had an underrated season in college, and then he showed obviously that explosiveness earlier in the year this year. But for any guard, they're going to be inefficient at times their rookie year. It's not going to be linear. And so I certainly didn't expect that to persist. But for me, yeah, I think he's got good defensive potential. We'll see how much that's not as guaranteed as some of the guys we've talked about, and Amen Thompson and Stephon Castle. It's still to be seen to what extent he buys in and fulfills that, and also how his body fills out. But then offensively as well, I think the potential's there. So some of that, like a lot of that, is more untapped than the other guys that we've talked about so far. But to me, maybe the highest upside guy left, and obviously a guy I liked coming into the draft, and so I'm sticking with that position.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said about VJ. I was lower on him at draft time, very pleasantly surprised by the start of his career with how confident he looked in his jumper. But I guess to provide sort of the flip side, because I sung his praises last week or last episode with Nate, and Nate was mainly talking about how now that they've shifted more like backup point guard responsibility to VJ, that has coincided with this sort of slump, I guess, or sort of regression, whatever you want to call it. That makes a lot of intuitive sense to me because he was never sort of a lead guard at Baylor. And it's, to me, my question is just how much of a lead guard is he actually going to be? Because if he's not a lead guard, then in spite of all of his athleticism, he's kind of like a pretty severely undersized wing, if you want to think of him as a wing. And so to me, in order for him to hit his draft slot, which was, third overall this year, he needs to be a real 3-level scorer off the dribble. And that dribble game is just a ways
Oh,
away.
yeah.
And though he is a breathtaking athlete, I don't know what he does on a basketball court at the moment that I would consider like a singular dominant trait in terms of like applying it to basketball. Maybe as like a weak side shot blocker, but then it's still like as a guard. Like I don't
Yeah.
know what he does to absolutely torture a defense necessarily unless he has a straight line all the way to the rim. And I don't believe that he is a lockdown defender against bigger players. And so it's just sort of like he has a lot of things that I like. I think he's a very gifted connective passer, has really underrated vision. But in terms of finding sort of the dominance in his game, that's what I think is like it's latent. That's what he needs
Yeah.
to evolve as a player for that stuff to come out. And so that's why I was a bit lower on him and probably would be a bit lower on him in this exercise.
Yeah, he's still got some evolving to do. I think he's shown some things, like he's shown the ability to get to a mid-range pull-up as a scorer more so early in his NBA career and a little bit in summer league than I saw last year at Baylor, which has been a positive. Good connective passer, like you said. It's hard comparing him to like another guy, Cason Wallace, that I really like, in that VJ could not start for a finals team right now, like
Right.
Cason Wallace can. But for me, it's kind of the bet that VJ Edgecombe can kind of be some Victor Oladipo version, maybe 2 years from now, and maybe a borderline all-star that's one of the best athletes in the NBA. I think to your point, maybe his handle is the thing that's most prohibiting him from getting to that. Um, but yeah, it's sticking with my board, is sticking with the upside. And yeah, it's a difficult conversation of balancing the production, the floor of a guy like a Cason Wallace that plays a similar position that's already proven to be an elite defender. Um, so I know I'm talking a little bit out of both sides of my mouth. In some cases, valuing the conservative floor we've seen, but in this case, I'm kind of sticking to my preseason 2025 board. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, Edgecombe's played super well at times, so it's not like he's been
Oh
disappointing at
yeah,
this point by
yeah.
any means. So that's just kind of the nature of this exercise, is trying to balance that. And I've got him in a tier with other guys, so it's not like I could be dissuaded from moving him down a few
Yeah.
spots or up a few spots.
And and it's a natural transition because though I could go in a couple different directions, I might as well take Harper next, Dylan
Yeah.
Harper, who we haven't taken yet. Uh, Considering like the similarity in size between the two of them, although I think Harper probably is a bit stronger. VJ certainly twitchier, more explosive, but uh, second overall pick in the 2025 draft, I had him third. He's missed time, though he's back now. Started out great his first handful of games. Harper, Harper obviously is more the traditional lead guard bet as opposed to VJ, which is
Yeah.
VJ's tantalizing because of all of that athleticism, but Harper, you sort of know that that you can entrust a lot of sort of initiation stuff to him. And because he has, in my opinion, he does have an area of dominance, or this at least you can project to be dominant in his ability to sort of drive, attack the rim, and finish in a variety of ways. That to me is important enough in the game and will remain so that it would be enough for me to keep him ranked over Edgecombe. I guess I had Harper third behind Flagg and Knipple. I had Edgecombe eighth. I'd probably have Edgecombe higher now, but
Yeah.
Harper would still be my preference. Yeah, I think what you really would. Shea is showing in OKC to sort of the nth degree what Cunningham is showing in Detroit this year is that like there was all this emphasis on acquiring wings for so many years because wings were relatively scarce. And wings are still really important. You still want to get them if you can, very high in the draft. But what you really want is just sort of guard skills in progressively bigger and stronger bodies. And the guard skills are what really matter because if you can initiate as a bigger guy, it means that you're not going to be hurting your defense as much as smaller initiators will. That's why OKC and Detroit are dominant defensive teams. I mean, they have great defensive personnel, but Shea and Cade allow them to acquire and play all of that great defensive personnel because Shea and Cade are actual defensive assets. They're not defensive anchors the way that you mentioned Trae Young earlier, or maybe you could say, Brunson. I don't want to insult all the Brunson fans, but like, you know what I mean? Like a smaller
John
guy
Morant.
would
Yeah.
like you did. It's a defensive boost to have a guy with size who can do all that. And Harper's not as big as Shea, and he's not as big as Cade, but he's big. I mean, and he'll be big because he's, very, very young. And if he can improve his craft, improve his footwork, particularly from like, I think 15 feet and in can really be his money area. If he can really do that, then, he's already playing with the best defensive player in the world and another all defense guy in Castle. But that's where that team in San Antonio really gels into a title team. If Harper is
Yeah.
starting and playing big minutes, and then that means that their defense, in my opinion, like would be the only defense possible to unseat OKC as the best in the league. And OKC is like lapped the field right now. San Antonio is capable of catching them, some version of the team. And I just think it's a version that puts a lot on Harper's plate offensively. Not overloading him because you have Wemby and you have Castle to help. But I think Harper is going to be very crucial to them because of how it's going to benefit their defense to allow him to run a lot of the show.
Yep. I've got Harper 8, and I had him as the clear number 4 guy in the 2025 draft. So that makes 3 Spurs in my top 8 and 2 Rockets in my top 4, which is kind of interesting to note. My one question,
Yeah.
yeah, go
And
ahead.
one Mav,
One
shout out to
Mav.
Cooper.
Yep.
Yeah.
My one kind of question, I guess, is when you compare him to to Cade and SGA, that made sense to me. My one question though is that I feel like those guys were able to rely on the mid-range pull-up as like a scoring avenue for them early in their career. And Dylan Harper also, similar to them, doesn't have like nuclear athleticism like a Jaw or a Westbrook that they can use, like we've seen Edgecombe do earlier in their career. And he's also, I don't expect him to be a very good 3-point shooter earlier on. So I'm wondering, I didn't kind of expect him to be that level of a mid-range shooter early in his career. Is that something? Do you agree with that? Do you worry about that? Where is his scoring going to be mainly just getting all the way to the rim early in his career? And if so, is there going to be some difficulty in that, especially with potentially not elite spacing in San Antonio?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a concern. I mean, that's why I had him third instead of second was a big part of that because I didn't, I what, to put it bluntly, I wasn't like super impressed with his touch and I wasn't super impressed with his athleticism. And it's hard to rank
Yeah,
someone second in a draft when that's the case. But I think I was impressed with how seamlessly he sort of shifted his role and embraced playing off of the ball. Now you have Wembanyama again, that makes your life a lot easier as an off-ball player than it would in other contexts, but that's his context. He shouldn't apologize for that. And because he's such a good finisher and the paint in the NBA is going to be so open, like he's going to be able to get to the rim whether or not he has to rely on it. And that will give him counters to go to in the mid range as guys really try to guard against stuff like that. So I agree that it remains incumbent on him to do more in the mid range. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be a pull up. I think he could play very well off of 2 feet. Like my hope for him as a star bet is sort of a Brunson derivative. Brunson's touch is so ridiculous though that I couldn't like
yeah,
fully be like this is a bigger Brunson. It's hard to really anoint someone like that. But I think that because he's already learned to compensate for sort of lack of tippy top athleticism, I think he can use sort of his bag of tricks as a finisher and just sort of back up from the rim more and more, play off of 2 feet more and more, work those pivots and step throughs, use his strength and physicality and become a guy who is like an extremely, like I said, 12 feet and in, 8 feet and in, really dangerous player in that way, which is not exactly the same way SGA does it. It's maybe a little bit similar to Cade.
yeah.
Cade does have the pull up more, but Cade knows how to, post up and use his shoulders and everything, very physically in Detroit. To me, it looks more like a Cade Brunson hybrid than it does Shaq.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, all right, me up at number 10 here. I'm going to take Cason Wallace. So, Cason Wallace plays 28 minutes per game for one of the best teams of all time. Starts for them, already started for at times for a team that won the championship last year. Yes, he's a role player, but he's an elite defender. He's efficient from everywhere on the floor. So, it doesn't really take anything off the table, and he provides a lot.
All defense quality guy, all
Yep.
defense quality player. So that means that I would think that every player from here on out is a guy that you have, like, even if you like them, there are warts there where you're like, they can't be as good of a low usage player that Wallace is.
Yep.
And at higher usage, like you have concerns. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that'd be fair to say. Exactly. And
Yeah.
yeah, he's already won at the highest level. I loved Cason Wallace in the draft too, so I'm sticking with that one there. And then the big differentiator with the other elite defenders is he's the first one that's also a good shooter too. And
And
that
he is
really helps.
yeah, he's the third guy off the board in 2023, correct? If I'm not
Uh
mistaken.
yep,
I think
Wemby,
it's just
Amen,
Wemby, Amen, and him.
Cason. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me that it's unfolded this way. When I went to do this, I was like 2023 is much lighter of a draft than it seems. And,
Yeah.
since Wemby was at the top, you know, I don't think it has that reputation, but I do think that is that draft's reputation at the moment. There's still, Anthony Black experiencing a little bit of a breakout. That's really
Yep.
nice to see. Uh, like Scoot will come back. We'll see if he rounds into form and makes that more of a discussion. But the fact that Wallace, as good as he is third, typically third best player in a draft is someone who you like envision making all-star games. I don't
Yeah.
really envision while he might make 5 all defense teams, but maybe not like one all-star team. And that's just very interesting. Um, I can't really knock the pick except to
Yeah.
maybe contrast it with who I pick next, but I don't want to just shoot off of Kaysen if you have more to say on him.
No, I don't really have. No, I agree with everything you said. If he can be 94% at his peak of peak Drew Holiday, that's like not quite going to make all star teams, but that's going to be a really good starter for an elite team. And again, I think the important point is that he doesn't take anything off the table. He's super efficient. If you foul him, he's going to make the free throw at a high rate. He's going to make the open three at a high rate. He can drive, and then he's a good ball handler, a good connective passer, like a sneaky good, like really good athlete in transition. So he's one of the guys, one of the many guys that allows OKC to play the way that they do. So yeah, is he going to make all star teams? Probably not, but he's a winning player that improves the team and really takes nothing off the table.
Yeah, I not you won't find me arguing against Case and Wallace. I will find it interesting whether or not the OKC development system. I mean, it's obviously good for him because it's such a great system. It helps everybody, especially those who buy into it. But it
He's
will
never going to
mean
get opportunity really to
exactly
spread
like to
himself.
become
Yeah,
to become 94% of Drew Holiday, you need to be like a real point guard.
yeah,
And he's like not that. He's sort of an undersized kind of wing switchblade
yeah,
guard who makes it all work because of his technique and his physical talent. But just interesting to see like if he's the league's, he's probably already the best quote unquote fifth starter in the league. That's what being the
yeah,
fifth starter for an all-time team gets you. But interested to see like what his next contract looks like and
yeah,
where that all goes. Um you can imagine obviously if they ever move on from Dort for cap reasons or whatever, if there's some backcourt shakeup, they'll put more on his plate immediately and we'll see. But
yeah.
all right, I will, there's lots of directions to go in here. This is this the ninth pick? This is we're at number
This is
nine.
a 11th.
11th,
Yeah,
because Harper was 9, Wallace was 10. Correct. All right. Then I will go with it's between two for me.
at this point, I have my ranking, but I still don't know who I would pick at this point.
uh I'm gonna go with Cedric Coward.
Ooh, okay.
Was he
I
not
had
on
my
your
other considered. It's just been such a small sample to this
yeah,
point, both in college and now, but certainly the big versatile wing is enticing. And I liked him in the last draft. It was just hard to put him. I think I had him like 10th or 11th just because
yeah.
we didn't see much of him. But the archetype is super valuable and he's been really good already. So,
Yep. And yeah, I had him 7th. It's the archetype is super valuable and it's not just his physical gifts, it's the shooting touch that he's always basically shown. And he started off on fire. He's cooled off since then, but from he's still shooting whatever high 80s from the free throw line, which is what he's always done. And so again, if you're trying to envision winning players, he is among the last perimeter guys on this list that I think has like a real all-star bet to him, where down the line he's good enough to efficiently average 20 or more with enough defensive chops on the other end to be like such to be the second or third best player on like a 5 seed. And that means that you could be an all-star, especially if you play out west. So that's really where it comes from. His decision making, I think, has been incredibly encouraging. All his intangibles and all the reports about him were great. That's partly why he was such a big riser throughout the pre-draft process. But the fact that he hasn't, that like no, the game speed has not been too fast for him is very, very encouraging to me. Probably the most encouraging thing about it, because that was the biggest unknown, is how he would adjust coming from such a lower level of competition and such a like a lighter experience sample to playing in the NBA. And since he already instantly belongs and has claimed a starting spot, you know, I'm all in for the Edie Coward era in Memphis. Long may they reign.
Nice. Yeah, we'll see who else joins him on that team in a couple of years. It might be completely different, but
Yeah.
that is interesting. So yeah, this is getting really difficult now. I'm not even going by my ranking, but this may be totally stupid. I'm gonna pick another OKC Thunder. I'm gonna pick AJ Mitchell. And I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know how good he actually is. But my thought is that if this Thunder team is gonna win, like if this team is like one of the greatest teams of all time, then they must have a lot of really good players on the team. Obviously, we know SGA is elite, but if they're that good, that means they have good players. AJ Mitchell, again, I didn't have him ranked this high, but I brought up EPM again, like I mentioned. He has the highest defensive EPM among the entire group of players we're evaluating, which I get some of that is playing in the OKC system where they're all amazing defensively, but that defense combined with the jump that he's made, averaging over 15 points a game, fitting into a team that's winning every game. We'll see what happens with like his usage and his scoring now that Jalen Williams is back. So maybe in 2 months, this pick doesn't look as good. But another high IQ player that defends, scores, I don't know. Am I dumb for overvaluing all these OKC role players this high compared to maybe other guys that have higher upside? I don't
What
know.
am I what am I going to tell you, Sam? You're
I'm
dumb
dumb.
for saying all the OKC players are really good. No, I'm not going to say that. I wouldn't say that to you. I think that the defensive metrics on AJ are the ones that are getting the biggest boost from playing in
Overvalued.
OKC. I mean,
Yeah.
offensively, he always had it. I mean, that's why he
Yeah.
was drafted, was because of his offensive talent. And I think what the jump to me for him has been physical. Like he was a 22-year-old, I think, when he was drafted, and
Yeah. Yeah. 23 now.
playing at mid-major UC Santa Barbara for all those years. I didn't appreciate what like a trampoline that NBA strength and conditioning would be for him specifically, because you usually view older players as closer to their physical peaks, you know.
Yeah.
And for him, like to me, he looks like a different guy just in his body and strength wise than he did in college. Not that he was a slouch, but he wasn't like an athletic monster in college. And he looks like very, very solid, and he looks quicker. He looks strong. I think he had some ankle problems in college, and I'm sure that OKC has worked through his hips and his entire posterior chain to try to prevent that from recurring. And it's all come together. I mean,
Yeah.
your point about with Jalen Williams back, what will it look like for him? I think, is relatively safe in that rotation because it goes back to what we've been saying about being a good enough decision maker for your team to entrust a lot of stuff to you. AJ has always had that. He's always had the vision. He's always had the handle to get to his spots. For the reasons I already stated, I like woefully underrated him in that draft.
Yeah.
But he And OKC did do, frankly, because I think they took Dylan Jones in the first round and took AJ in the second round, but or
Mhm.
traded for AJ in the second round. But he the ability to assume some of that guard stuff when Shea is off the floor and to handle the ball a lot and drive without turning it over. That's just stuff that will always matter. It's why there's like a mini resurgence in TJ McConnell, Trey Jones, Gillespie. You know,
Gillespie's been like the biggest surprise to me in the NBA
yeah,
this
like
year.
it just the ability to handle without turning the ball over and continuing to make good decisions. AJ can do that, and he's a three-level scorer, and he's more defensively gifted than those other guys. So, like, no, I'm not gonna have any qualms with this pick. He will
Yeah,
always be good and always help his team, and will never like he's never gonna like take anything off the table, which is similar to what you said with Kaysen, but
yeah,
in a different way, and
different package. Yeah,
arguably in a way that can matter more than what Kaysen does, depending on the matchup.
yep. And not that this is a tell-all stat, but he's second in raw plus minus on OKC, which I thought was at least a little bit interesting and noteworthy. So,
Yeah, yeah, he's excellent, man. He's awesome. Um, okay, so back to me. Let me check to see if any other Thunder are eligible that I could take here. But I'll go with who I was debating against Cedric Coward, which was, oh, well, I could take, I'll take Buzelis. I was thinking
nice.
about taking someone else instead from that draft instead of Buzelis, but I'll take Buzelis. Uh, mentioned him earlier. I do kind of wish he was on a different team where he got to showcase more on the ball because that's where he's most comfortable. Uh, not a natural playmaker, not physically overwhelming. I mean, he's stretched out at 6'9 plus 6'10, but is never going to be like jacked or anything like that. But Buzelis is a weird kind of like savant player. When he is attacking off the drive, he is a very creative finisher, really uses those long limbs to create deceptively easy angles for himself where it looks like he's working really hard and then he's just by himself at the cup and laying the ball in the hoop. And that is just going to translate into very efficient offensive play. And on defense, again, not overpowering, but has some ability to contest and locate the ball without fouling as a rim protector that is not it's not to the level obviously of Chet Holmgren. Chet's, bigger and a much more decorated player and a much over like more gifted overall defensive player. But Buzelis can make real defensive plays to make a real difference at the rim defensively and in containing drives or in recovery. And if you get any sort of playmaking out of him, any whatsoever, then he's a very large player who can provide real two-way value. And that is useful, incredibly useful. Is it star level stuff where he's winning playoff series? Remains to be seen, but I wouldn't write it off. So Buzelis, again, another intangibles freak, just like Cedric Coward, like a lot of guys we've mentioned, but still very, very young, younger than Coward, younger than AJ, younger than Case and Wallace, everything. So uh, I think in good company with all those players. So I'd take Buzelis.
Nice. Yeah. I had him basically in the same exact spot. I had him 12th on my board, so didn't really differ much at all there. This next one for me, I'm debating between two guys. I'm just maybe to be a little more interesting. I'm going to go with Khalil Ware here.
Cool. Yeah, sure.
As I go through this, I realize I might. I'm picking all the guys that have played really well the last month. No, but he's kind of making a run at that best rebounder award that you gave to Zach Edey. He's like that's something that the Heat have demanded of Khalil Ware this year, and he's responded to that. He's in the 94th percentile in offensive rebound and 98th percentile in defensive rebounding, over 10 a game in terms of his rebounds now this year. And he's just a unique player that's a good athlete. He shoots over 40% from three, and he's over 7 feet tall. So if he can continue doing those things and proves that he can be a legitimate, defensive player, that he can solidify himself as, yeah, a legitimate defensive player, a legitimate rebounder with that size and shooting, that really makes it easy in terms of the roster and lineup construction around him, which is something that I enjoy. And so I think he's not going to be obviously the best player, the second best player on any team, but he's a guy that can be a good starter for a team that opens up, like I said, the roster construction around him, fits around players, and is going to be hopefully a positive on both sides of the ball.
And interesting you mentioned the roster construction when the Heat are deep, uh, and now that they're healthy, they are bringing him off the bench.
Yeah.
Where, their issue for so long was how do they get more out of their offense? A legit 7-footer who can shoot threes is sort of the easiest shortcut to improving all of that. And though the Heat are getting rightfully praised for their new offensive system, which is a ton of ISO and sort of gap
Mhm.
relocation, gap filling behind whoever's isolating and taking someone downhill. Um, I think that just secondary to that is the fact that they just are playing Ware a lot of minutes, and they've had to play him a lot of minutes. And I don't know that it's clear that playing Bam makes their offense look any better than playing Ware, or at the very least that they should play Bam and Ware more. And I think they are reluctant to do that because it does compromise the everyone can take people off the dribble stuff, because Ware's not going to take many people off the dribble and Bam
Yeah.
only can take some people off the dribble. So it's sort of like it's not necessarily the right fit for what they had in mind. But Ware is just too physically talented, man. Like you
Yeah.
have to play that guy like 28 minutes a night, in my opinion. You just the more the better for him. And so I think it's like a great pick. I agree
Yeah.
with it. Um, and it's it makes me happy that so many players from the 2024 class are looking so good, because they certainly got maligned during the process. But yeah, there's not a Kalel Ware in the 20, like to me he is a better, I mean, I guess we both agree about this because neither one of us have taken him, but he's a better prospect than Malawach. And
Oh
so
yeah.
there wasn't a Kalel Ware-ish player to his extent in this 2025 draft. He is a rare talent over multiple drafts. And I liked him and had him as a lotto pick uh, at draft time in 24, but I didn't like him enough. I saw the vision a bit. There were times where I had him in the top 10, but I found reason to take him out, and I shouldn't have, but that's what happens. But yeah,
Yeah.
big fan of
I've
Ware.
got him. I've got him and Lively and Sar all in the same tier, and it was kind of difficult for me. But I, yeah, I prefer my bigs to be I like the skill that Alexar has, but I prefer him to be a bit more rugged and kind of physical than Sar is, and so especially with the rebounding that Ware has shown in response to Spolstra's pronging or criticism,
Mm-hmm.
has kind of proven that he can be that rugged center combined with his athleticism and shooting. But I know most people, especially coming into the year, would have preferred Lively, and then SARS made a big leap this year. So I think that the whole center group is an interesting conversation for sure.
Well, I'll let you take your pick of those gentlemen, because with this next selection, which I believe are we up to 15 now? I think is where we're at.
I think
I
so.
I
Yeah.
am going to take Brandon Miller.
Okay.
So I guess we were both probably a little softer on Miller, maybe even at draft. I had Miller fifth in that draft. Um, Mainly because I didn't see sort of the high end athleticism necessarily for him to become a real, like, again, he's not Paul George as an athlete on the wing. And if you're not going to be an elite athlete on the wing and you're going to play high starter minutes, then you better be like an absolutely like all NBA level scorer, essentially. And Miller, I think, has a lot of scoring talent, but maybe not necessarily that. But this I still think is a good spot for him. I guess 15th means that he's still a top 5 pick. You average over the last few drafts. Charlotte's been a horrible situation for a lot of reasons, on the court and off the court, and health wise, and switching coaches and GMs and all this stuff. So I don't think that Miller has necessarily gotten the best kind of runway. But now he gets to play with Knipple. I think that Miller is going to survive whatever purge they go through over the next couple years that I referenced earlier when talking about Khan. And he's still 6'9", still can get a ton of threes up, and hopefully with a better roster construction, like, you see more in his game. But he has qualities as a wing that I don't think any remaining player really has that we will discuss. So I'll take Miller here.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much would echo that sentiment. My note next to him is like, what is Brandon Miller? Because between the injuries and especially playing for this weird, unserious Hornets team, like, I just feel like I don't really know. I know he can score. I know he's a 6'9" small forward, which is valuable in and of itself. But how good of a shooter is he going to be? Like, can he be a serious winning player? On that same uh, question, like, what is he going to be defensively? Is he going to be like a stopper wing defender to some extent, or where on that spectrum is he going to be? I feel like I just don't. He's still kind of like that ball of clay where I just don't know exactly where he's going to wind up. And again, most of that is just due to the situation that he's been in. So, to your point, I expect he would survive the purge that happens, and that they're able to get the right players around he and Khan to kind of figure that out. I had him, just because of those things, a little bit lower. I had him 17th on mine, but
Mhm.
it's all between 9 and 19, 10 and 19. I mean, it's all the same tier for me. So, not really too much different. I think we're pretty much on the same page. The one other thing I'll add is that 47% on twos last year scared me a little bit. And that's just kind of backing up what you said. He's just not that elite level athlete that we think about with some of the star level wings, whether that's the Kawhi or the Paul George. So I'm hoping that the shooting solidifies this year. We all expect him to be a good shooter. So hopefully that's something that solidifies and he can hang his hat on. But I'm really just interested to see what he does this year and what solidifies for him as his kind of skills that he can hang his hat on, other than being a 6'9" small forward that can score to some extent.
Well, and for what it's worth, over 60% on twos so
So
far. Now
far
it's
this year.
been
Yeah.
whatever, 5, 6 games, but
Yeah.
yeah, this is a big playing with Knipple and having like a lob threat and Kalkbrenner. Like, things are finally going to be easier for him and not harder. So,
Yeah.
he's not going to have to be covering for Tijan Salon. Just lots of
Yeah.
easy money, low hanging fruit everywhere for Brandon.
Yeah.
So,
All right. Well, I'm going to wait to take those centers, and I'm going to take Asar Thompson here.
yeah, no, it's good. Asar's a good pick. Yeah.
Just because at this point, I feel like I want to take somebody that I know has certain strengths. And with Asar Thompson, yes, he's got certain questions that are obvious, which we've talked about and are similar to his brother. But I do know he's an elite defender. I do know he's an elite athlete. He has good size, measurables. So I know he's going to provide that. I know that the Pistons started winning a lot more when they got him. That's certainly not all on him, but it's not all maybe a coincidence either. So he's got that baseline. Shoots a little bit better than his brother. He's kind of probably in between Steph Castle and Amin Thompson, I would probably say, on the shooting spectrum. The roster and lineup construction becomes a bit difficult with that deficiency, but I just think that he can be, and he's already an elite defender on the wing, and that's valuable in and of itself. So I'm going to take that known quantity and that known skill here.
Yeah, think it's a good one. You know, you want to try to take guys who can make an all defense team if you don't think they can make an all-star team. Because
Yeah.
generally speaking, those are the quote unquote role players that you find playing in deep playoff series is all defense level guys. So by that metric, Asar certainly qualifies. I didn't necessarily see some giant leap coming from him this year the way that some people predicted, just because if you're like a deficient shooter, that deficiency just follows you. Even becoming average means that your numbers are still going to be pretty pedestrian, and it's a lot to go from bad to average, and Asar is not there yet. So, uh, very good player, lot to like about him. Uh, Certainly benefited from that playoff experience last year, though Jalen Brunson like really cooked him at the end of one of those games, but that's part of it. Um, Good player, very good player. And just to complete a theme, um, I was debating on taking this guy for a couple spots now anyway, but he's a SARS teammate, so I'll take Ron Holland next, which I
Nice.
believe is 17 now. So we got just a few left. Uh, I personally like Ron more than Asar. And I think he's more, there's a case to be made for either player. I think he has more in his scoring projection than Asar necessarily does. I just kind of like his touch a little bit more. I also think that he is more wide. Like neither one of them were really lead guards growing up. You know, Asar played a lot off his brother, and Ron didn't really get that chance until the G League. I just think, and they both play very hard. Ron is just, and it's a credit to Detroit for being such a group of psychos. But even on that team, I think that Ron's competitiveness is like him and Isaiah Stewart and Cade, like they're even above Asar, and Asar is a really good competitor. There's something about Ron's ability to guard at point of attack and also be willing like to play backup point guard for stretches. Not that they need him to do that now because they have Levert, but whenever injuries have put him in that spot in Detroit over his first couple years, he has embraced that role and has just sort of filled up the box score. And I, you know, I think he is an all defense level talent as well. Uh, and I just like to see where it goes with him. I don't know that he'll ever be a great shooter, but I think he's got a better chance at being an average one than maybe Asar does. So that he'd be my next pick.
Yeah, I didn't realize that you liked Holland that much. I had him coming into his draft. I had him second in that class, and
So did
so
I.
I wouldn't change much off of that, other than other guys have kind of exceeded expectations. I would say my main just concern with Holland is that he maybe gets lost in the logjam now that Detroit's already good and they've got guys ahead of him. So that's kind of my main concern just with him long term. But in terms of just watching him this year and watching him in summer league, I think his shot looks better. Just anecdotally watching it, I think it looks smoother at the free throw line. I think he's shooting free throws well and did in summer league too. But I know like the numbers haven't really showed up for him in terms of his efficiency, and his raw numbers this year haven't really improved like many hoped. But I still, he's like one of the guys that when I think about myself that I'm higher on compared to consensus, just because he hasn't necessarily had the chance or hasn't really kind of blown up or taken that next step yet. But I think that's there for him, and I think he's one of the guys that I'm higher on among this group of people compared to maybe just the consensus general NBA fandom, and it seems like you are as well.
Yeah. And he's sort of the inverse of Miller, where he shot nearly 61% on twos. Again, smallish sample last year, and is taking only one more two per game this year and is down to like 49%. So
Yeah.
clearly, the actual truth there is somewhere in the middle, and I think there's some positive regression for him coming. He's also up to, he was 75% from the line last year, 79 this year. Like, I don't think he is this total non-shooter.
I
It's
don't
just
think so either.
the 3-point vault, like the 3-point numbers have not been there and aren't there yet, but give that time. Ron is good enough to where he's never gonna wash out because he's too good an athlete, plays too hard, does too many things that help a team. So I think you could make a case, and I have made the case before, that he has like a better future than Steph Castle. It's just that Castle is more of a natural point guard and probably has better overall feel, whereas like Ron is more of a maniac. But they have similar concerns and similar strengths. So I just don't forget about Ron. I think he's going to be heard from.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any opportunity for a team to sneak in and try to acquire him.
But
Well,
there's
maybe
an
his
opportunity.
stock is the highest
Yeah, I
right now.
mean,
I would
if
like to see him in like Utah, a team that kind of needs that type of prospect. They've got some good bit. I don't know. I would like to see him
some tells me
get more opportunity.
there's a player in Utah that Detroit might have some interest in. So
Yep. Yeah, seriously. That might actually make sense. All right. So I'll take maybe the more conservative Derek Lively pick here. Um,
alrighty.
and he is a dependent player. He needs someone to set him up, but very good rim protector. And we've seen him play really well in the playoffs already, which I
Mm-hmm.
know it's kind of easy to forget about now since there's been a little bit of time between them. But yeah, he was really good in the playoffs already. I mean, people were very, very high on him coming off of that year. And then guess what? Luka disappears. He's not getting those lobs at the rim anymore. Yeah, duh, that makes sense. And they don't have, I mean, they have D'Angelo Russell, but they don't really have that spread offense with him standing in the dunker spot catching lobs all the time anymore. So he's not going to necessarily get the numbers or maybe the notoriety on a team that has Luka Doncic on it. So yes, he's a dependent player. He's not going to self-create, but I think in the right situation, he can be extremely valuable like we've already seen. And yeah, I mean, people were talking about him being like the Team USA center of the future, in the last year or two. So I don't think just because Luka is no longer the team that he should fall too far. I do think we've seen that maybe he isn't as impactful, though, obviously, when he doesn't have an elite, guard wing creator setting him up. But at this point, what am I getting him at? This is like the equivalent of like the sixth pick in a draft. So maybe a little bit high for a defensive player there, but I think this
No,
is the
he
right time
has,
to take
but
him.
he has offensive value.
Yeah,
Really
he's a
good passer out of the
solid
short
passer.
roll.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And really, really good finisher. I mean, really, and I'll take Sar next because
yeah,
that takes us to 19. Can't not take Sar given how well he's played, even though his team's not winning. But yeah, I mean, you draft a 7-footer who can contribute on both ends of the floor. There's a great argument for both these guys having fallen too far. So I am more in on Lively than I am on Sar. I was softer on Sar in his draft year. Did not think he was a top 2 pick. And, you know, part of me's waiting for the other shoe to drop here with some of this stuff. But when you sacrifice 3-point shots for shots near the rim and you're the 5 and that rim is yours if you want it on offense, that usually is going to result in good things as it has for Sar. I still don't know that I buy his touch being this improved because he still does those sort of like frustrating fadeaways that I saw as a prospect, but they've been going in earlier this year. But he's always going to be able to protect the rim without fouling. That back to when he was a prospect, and he's going to be able to make passes out of the short roll. He did that as a prospect. So, he's a foundational piece. The Wiz bummed me out because I like Keyshawn George and I like Trey Johnson, and I even still like Bub and even believe a bit in Bilal and Will Riley. Something is going on there that is not quite right. And I don't know. I need to watch more before I'm more definitive on it, but Sar's been kind of undeniable this year as like a legitimate piece that can be very helpful, at least in a lineup construction way. Still yet to prove that he's an unabashed winning player, but I think it's safe to assume that he will get there. So I'll take Sar next.
Yeah, it really has been just a massive leap from a terrible rookie season where he shot like 45% on twos, but also didn't make threes and didn't make free throws. And yeah,
You're right.
I mean, the situation in Washington, like you said, it's hard to evaluate. I'm not going to lie, I don't watch a ton of Wizards games either. So um, I hope they figure out the environment there and can get maybe a centerpiece prospect that this can revolve around. Like you said, I considered Keyshawn George. I I have him 20th on mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'll just make my next two picks. And I was debating between the two K Georges actually. Um, I'm going to take Keontae George though, just to I want to give him the shout out. I think maybe Utah, not a lot of people are watching him either, but he's putting up big numbers. I think he actually has the highest offensive EPM among this entire group as well, and he takes on a really huge like load offensively. 24 points per game, 7 assists, still turning the ball over too much, not making the three, but shooting 90% on free throws. So he has kind of made, in my opinion, that year three leap um, way up on 2 point percent as well, from 44 to 53 this year. So a lot of the things that you expect from a guard in his third year, he's kind of made all those leaps. He's like the one Utah prospect that I actually feel good about. um, a lot of their other guys have been either not getting opportunity or just have not really, it just hasn't happened for him yet. So I wanted to give a little bit credit there to Utah. I think Keontae George, under the radar, a team maybe not a ton of people are watching, but he is a legitimate scorer, and he's carried a huge load offensively for Utah.
Yeah, I very happy to see that from him. I've
Is he
always
a winning
been,
player? I'm not 100% sure, but it's hard to say in Utah. So
eh, you know, for him, I think cutting down on his turnovers was a big deal. I was always skeptical of him physically as an athlete, and so that often meant like if you're a subpar athlete, that can manifest itself in a high turnover rate because you're not gaining separation and you're not elevating over anyone and you're just easier to contain with one defender. And so, like, he's in a great system and they're, you know, pretty crowded guard room between him and Collier and now Walter Clayton. So, for Keontae to take the necessary step to be the unquestioned starter there is certainly noteworthy. I wouldn't have taken him, but I get it. I do. And the numbers are impressive enough to warrant a mention. So that gets us to 20, does it not?
it does. Yep.
So I will, just so that we have a top seven pick in each of the last three drafts. This is a guy I actually should have taken earlier. And I probably know why you didn't take him, but I love him. And I should have taken him, you know, probably 6 picks ago or so, and that would be Derek Queen. So he would
Yeah.
be my last guy. Um, Derek is a lot of fun. He's also playing for a team that has not won a lot, but he's frankly more fun than Alex Sarr to me. So we should have taken him above Alex Sarr. He's not going to get lost in the shuffle. He makes himself known very loudly, so he doesn't have that sort of danger that Holland has, and he's not going to be a consequence of his environment because he's going to mold his environment. So he doesn't really have a Brandon Miller issue either. Look, Derek's foibles, his drawbacks are well chronicled. To me, if this is the worst version that we ever see of Derek Queen, like he's never in worse shape than he is now. He's never less physically ready to play than he is as a rookie coming off of a wrist injury, which robbed him of his off season. He's never in as depressing a situation as he's in now from a teammate standpoint. Then you're going to be dealing with a very good player down the line as a real deal hub. I loved the feel that was evident in his game as a driver, as a playmaker, and as a defender, even though he's not built to be a great defender. There's always going to be stuff to pick at, but just way too talented a guy who can go on really crazy stretches, especially on offense, and already has. So that kind of feel, there was similar skepticism about Şengün. Şengün never had sort of the physical like conditioning question that Derek has, but uh undersized fives who know how to really operate as a pseudo guard, they tend to just always hit to some appreciable extent. So because
Yeah.
of that, I'm taking Derek, and I actually think there's a good chance that he outperforms where he is on our list here.
Yeah, he's certainly a very interesting player. I had him number 9 on my 2025 board, so he was in other considered. He's kind of one of these interesting, really modern centers that's a little bit undersized, similar to Şengün, that yeah, you can just space it out and they can just go at their guy one on one and score, or make the pass. But good handles, good vision, good touch around the rim, and just has a lot of skill in terms of his ability to finish and just create offensively that centers didn't really have until recently. But we've seen a batch of those guys, and I think Şengün is is a better comparison. I know there's been a lot of Jokic talk. He's not going to be Jokic, but I think one of the main concerns that I had was just being undersized, like you said, because it's tough for me to see the pathways defensively with him. And I think we've already seen that. He's going to be special offensively at times. And that's why I couldn't really drop him much further down my 2025 board. But just the pathways to being a successful NBA player are a little bit more narrow with him. Um, so I don't think a ton of difference there. I wouldn't have had him in my top 20, but he has had an exciting last couple of weeks as well. So certainly a guy to at least bring up. Let me just see real quick who I had as my next few guys. So Keyshawn George was on there, and
Mm-hmm.
then I had Scoot, Anthony
Mm-hmm.
Black. From 2025, the guys that I had 5 through 8 are Colin Murray Boyles,
Yep.
Carter Bryant, Trey Johnson, and Jace Richardson. So those guys were kind of in the next group as well. Um, yep.
Interesting. Yeah, I had I mean whatever, we'd be getting into the weeds. But I
Yeah.
guess we were similarly a bit lower on Ace. I had a lot of those guys, but I had Donovan Clingan as well.
Yep.
Um in terms of just playing, you can imagine with a better space team that Clingan could still contribute to a winning situation there. And so
Yeah.
I don't really view him as in like a different tier or a lower tier than like Sar and Ware. I think Klingan's right there. So uh Jalen Wells, Jared McCain, still think Jan Hansen is going to be heard from eventually, but is in, sort of a suppressed environment in Portland. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of guys. Ace isn't that far off, but I'd say that, we didn't mention Risacher.
I was gonna say we didn't mention the number one pick. He was kind of the last guy in my group of 15. He's had a little bit of a not maybe exciting jump this year, so he hasn't gotten a lot of notoriety there.
To me, that's the entrusting with offensive responsibility thing. Like Risacher, the Hawks almost explicitly took him because they weren't going to give him offensive responsibility. And like, isn't
Yeah,
this nice that we can just slide him in and he's not going to like rock the boat? And that's
yeah,
just not what you do with a top pick. You want to find someone who is going to rock your boat a little bit, because your boat can't be that exciting if you've got the number one pick, even if you jumped up in the lottery. So I like that was my thought on Risacher in a nutshell. I didn't think that the ceiling was really there. but this isn't really to bag on, this the point of the episode was to draft players, all of whom we had positive things to say. There is positive stuff to say about Risacher. It's just that I don't think he's overwhelming enough as a defender to ever be an all defense player. And if you're going to be a solid, but not necessarily all defense guy on one end, and someone who doesn't really force the issue on the other end, then you get lost. That's what happens. So that's sort of what I see with Zach, but hopefully he proves me wrong.
Yeah. So I guess in summary, the two we didn't have a ton of differences. You do like the Grizzlies guys, Cedric Coward and Zach Edey, a little bit
That's
higher
right,
than I
baby.
did. I
That's
went
right.
with the OKC role players pretty high. And one thing that I've kind of continued to learn about myself is that I value the upside offensively with certain guys, and we talked about that with like Reed Shepard and Con Knipple at the top. But once I don't see that as realistic, I'm kind of more conservative, and I want guys that aren't going to take anything off the table and are going to be role players. So that's like versatility defensively, size on the perimeter, and then shooting if possible. And so that's kind of where I started to lean once we got past the first few guys. Whereas I tend to push off the centers a little bit more compared to what you did, maybe, especially with like Edie, for example. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think for myself, some of the guys that I said are sort of like interesting offensive bets who maybe don't have the defensive ceiling of Wallace, someone like Buzelis or Miller or Cedric Coward. I think that they all have enough size and or athleticism to where they are still settling in as valuable role players once they get their ideal like usage later on in their career. Once it becomes clear what kind of a role they're going to play if star is taken off the table from them. So that's sort of how I defaulted to it. Um, I think centers are valuable, man. I think it's hard to find good ones that you know that you can play. I think it's kind of a misnomer that they're so replaceable. And I think you look at the difference in skill set between Edie, Ware, Lively, Sar, Queen. Like those are all very different kinds of guys. And so it's no accident, though, that a lot of statistical models have liked all of them, like, at varying points this season already. That having someone, 6'10" and up with some strength to them who knows how to play basketball is usually going to help your team. So
yeah,
they're not perfect in every scenario, but like I said, neither's Amen Thompson. He's not perfect in every scenario.
yeah,
So, like, we're not saying this because we think this list is going to be correct. Our lists differ. We could be proven wrong, but I think it is useful to work through the methodology. It really is.
yeah,
And apologies to Pelicans fans. I have a lot of friends who are Pelicans fans. I love Derek Queen, I promise. So,
yeah. Yeah, I said I pushed the centers down, but I did take Ware and Lively. So everyone goes against their own tenets to a certain extent. So
yeah.
you gotta be versatile. You gotta go with the flow. You gotta take the talent when it's there, right?
Yes, you do. And Uh, that's it for this one, man. Normally this is a two-part episode that takes like 4 hours because we go to 30. So I'm glad we were able to squeeze this in the way we did. It was a long one, but it was good. Thank you very much, Sam, as always, for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.